Welcome back, boxing fans. Obviously, we had a big fight this weekend. Lomachenko, Cambosis, down under Australia. One of three fights we've had over the last 2 weeks. Obviously, Inui from Japan against Luis Neri, and Canelo Alvarez versus Jaime Munguia as well. So it's been a very busy time in boxing. Some people are still dwelling on Haney, Ryan Garcia, PEDs, and I'll leave them to that and I'll get moving on with boxing. So, obviously, the conversation now is who's Lomachenko going to fight next? And we know people that are historically anti Lomachenko. They're going to try to find whatever opponent they feel has the best possible chance of beating Lomachenko next because that's what they want. They want anything that will justify or, be able to push their narrative that Lomachenko is a hype job. He's overrated. He's media curated. He's not that good. He's not special. He's not pound for pound. He's not one of the best fighters in boxing. They will say anything and they will go to any extent to try to find ways to discredit and downplay Vasily Lomachenko. This weekend, he did what both Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney couldn't do. He stopped George Kambosos. He was literally the first fighter in Kambosos' career that was able to stop him. And George is only 30 years old. He is far from shot. He's far from finished. He hasn't been in a bunch of wars and fights that have taken a big toll on him. I mean, people that want to act like the Devin Haney 2 fights took a big toll on him. Come on, let's get real. Who's ever been in a fight with Devin Haney that had a big toll put on them? Let's just be honest. Devin Haney's a slick fighter, a good boxer, but he's not the kind of guy that goes on to pummel you and ruin your career like a Sabrio Matias and some other fighters. Of course, now, not surprisingly, people want to downplay Lomachenko's win against Kambosos, whereas I've been honest from day one. George Kambosos is a good fighter, but I never felt he was better than Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, Shakur Stevenson, Tank Davis, Lomachenko, or Teofimo Lopez. Yes, he does have a win against Teo, but I think more of that came down to Teo being greedy, losing some of his team because of his greed, and a lot of that came back to bite him in the ass. As so many times in boxing, that's what happens. I definitely felt that Lopez would have won in the rematch, probably convincingly. But this is not about that. This is about this. The question now is, who is Lomachenko going to fight next? Obviously, right after his victory, both Shakur Stevenson and Tank Davis were all over social media trying to put themselves in position for that potential fight. If you've been watching boxing for a long time, you know that both Floyd Mayweather and Tank Davis blatantly ducked Vasily Lomachenko for years. So it would only be fitting that now they're trying to fight him, now that he's 36 years of age, because that's exactly what they said they were going to do. Age him out and then fight him later on in his career. So if that fight gets done, you understand exactly what's going on in Tank Davis and his team's brain. They're thinking he's old, he's shot, now is the time. For Shakur Stevenson, yeah, for him being a top-ranked fighter, this is the biggest pinnacle potential fight that he could get within the top-ranked stable. But I'll be honest. The truth is, at this point, at this time, the legacy fight for both Shakur Stevenson and Tank Davis is not Lomachenko. It's fighting one another. These two fighters are literally in their physical prime. That is a unification fight and a legacy fight. It's kind of like, let's use this comparison. When both Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence were trying to get a Manny Pacquiao fight when Pacquiao was 40 years old, coming off of his Keith Thurman victory, we understood why they wanted it because they both knew that it'd be a successful pay-per-view. He's old, but that name on their resume would be obviously excellent to have, right? And that's what they were chasing, the name on the resume and the big payday they knew they'd get from it, which would just help elevate them higher in boxing. This is the same thing with Tank Davis and Shakur. Them chasing Lomachenko is only chasing him because they feel that at 36, he's past his prime. He's still got the name recognition. It's obviously still a big fight economically. So they would rather take less of a risk fighting Lomachenko than challenging one another to take on that fight, a fight that truly would be a legacy fight, right? The lightweight version of Leonard versus Hearns. But of course, that's not what these guys are going to push. It's kind of the same narrative we saw that Lomachenko was ducking Devin Haney at 135 pounds when he literally was chasing undisputed by fighting Teofimo Lopez. He was literally chasing a world champion as opposed to his mandatory. And historically, that's always been acceptable. That's always been the norm. That's always what people expect champions to really do. If you take on your mandatory, people sort of question really your heart and your desire. But for you chasing after all the champions, that's literally what you do or you should do. So that's what Lomachenko was doing. He allowed, with Top Rank, Lopez to build up his name by fighting Comey to win that IBF title. They could have fought Comey to win that world title. Lomachenko could have been undisputed if he would have fought Comey and then fought Luke Campbell, or however that situation would have unfolded. But they knew that if they built up Lopez, potentially that would turn into a big in-house fight for Top Rank. But unfortunately, it didn't work out quite the way they were hoping, as of course Lomachenko had a shoulder injury, got outperformed in the beginning of that fight, looked like he might close it out, but wasn't able to do it. Lopez jumped on him in the 12th round to solidify the victory and went on to become the unified and should really rightfully have become the undisputed champion. But because of bullshit from the WBC, Lomachenko, not so much Lomachenko, but Kambosos and Lopez suffered because of it, all to give Haney a belt that really at the time was meaningless. But Devin Haney fans will act like it was legitimate. He deserved it. He did what he should have done to earn it. But no, he didn't. And if that would have been dealt correctly by the WBC, we wouldn't have had all that bullshit. Lopez would have become undisputed, and then Kambosos would have become undisputed, and then Haney would have become undisputed, and that's the way it should have unfolded. But unfortunately, the politics of boxing just muddied the waters, creating turmoil and confusion, especially within the YouTube boxing community. But let's get on to this little video today, talking about who's next for Vasily High-Tech Lomachenko. So for me, I think this is a great matchup between two world champions. Obviously, if I had my way of happening, this would be the fight that I would prefer, even though it's a super dangerous fight. Navarrete is very tall, much longer than Lomachenko, a hard puncher who's very unorthodox and throw punches from crazy angles. So he has everything in his toolkit to potentially pull an upset, right? It's not as if he doesn't have the length to throw a jab from distance and land one of those crazy fucking uppercuts from outside range to drop Lomachenko on his ass, like he's dropped so many fighters in the past. But of course, haters are going to do the same thing they did when people talked about a potential Valdez versus a Navarrete fight. They acted like, oh no, you guys are being racist because you don't want to give Shakur Stevenson his shot. But this is not about giving somebody a shot, as if somebody, just deserves an opportunity, right? This is about, if you're the promoter and as a boxing fan, making fights that sell, that are marketable, and entertaining. Everybody knew a Navarrete-Valdez fight was going to be a far more interesting fight than Shakur versus Valdez. And that's exactly how it played out. The only difference is when Navarrete fought Valdez, it wasn't for unified titles. It wasn't quite as significant as it could have been, right? But it was still a great fight, very entertaining, and a much more entertaining fight than Shakur against Valdez, which everybody knew was not going to be an exciting fight. And the irony is people pushed for that fight, but yet when Jamal Herring was a WBO world champion and was looking for a unification fight with Valdez, something he probably deserved, then of course Top Rank forced, and the promotion, the sanctioning body forced him to defend against his mandatory Shakur Stevenson instead of fighting for unification. So it's funny how people pick and choose their battles. So for Shakur, he deserved unification, but for Jamal Herring, he didn't deserve unification. Right? It's ridiculous, but this is what boxing is, right? A double standard, fucking, it's just consistently filled with double standards. For Lomachenko, obviously, he's been one of the most exciting fighters in boxing. People try to say that, oh, even Shakur made a statement, oh, when Lomachenko goes 12 rounds, it's exciting. He's the Matrix. But when I go 12 rounds, it's boring. See, the problem with this kind of mentality is you have to be really ignorant to think that somehow Lomachenko and Shakur Stevenson fight the same way, because they don't fight anything the same. Lomachenko is a much more aggressive uh, front foot boxer who doesn't rely specifically only on defense, but primarily works on, footwork and offense, being aggressive, moving forward, which does get him hit. Whereas Shakur is completely opposite. He is defense first. And because of that, fights can get boring, right? If he doesn't have the right kind of opponent. With Lomachenko, I don't know if I've ever seen Lomachenko in a boring fight. If he is much better than the opponents, then he styles and profiles and throws out moves that we don't usually see in boxing. If it's competitive, then it's competitive. It's a very entertaining back and forth fight between two very good fighters. We saw an example with Richard Comey. Richard Comey was a IBF world champion who went on to fight at 140 pounds and was in competitive fights. But yeah, when he stepped in to face Lomachenko, he was getting embarrassed so bad that Lomachenko basically took his foot right off the gas to try to protect him, because they had a good relationship. Obviously, they knew each other from being at 135 pounds, and he didn't want to hurt him. But this was the kind of fight where Lomachenko, if he would have really showed that killer instinct, would have got rid of Comey, right? And in devastating fashion. But he didn't, because one of the weaknesses he has is he doesn't have that kill type of mentality that some fighters do have. And well, in some cases that's detrimental. In other cases, you have to respect the guy who's in the sport of boxing because it's a sport. Lomachenko's always sort of looked at boxing from that perspective, obviously coming from a long, pedigree of amateur boxing with 396 wins and one loss. Obviously, it was about competition. It was about the sport of boxing. And as a pro, that's literally what he's wanted to do. Fight all the best guys, fight world champion after world champion. He literally wanted to fight for a world title in his first professional fight. And he really wants to fight for nothing but world titles against world champions. And because of that, he's always striving to take on the best competition available. He got very frustrated and upset when he wasn't able to get the best competition, when that was at 126 and when that was at 130. He ended up moving out of divisions where he was dominant, and we probably missed some of the best moments of his career because he knew he couldn't get fights with the other champions. So he chose to put himself in a position where at least he was guaranteed opportunities, and that was 135. So Loma, of course, is a two-time Olympic gold medal winner, a three-weight world champion who unified three of the four belts. Obviously not the IBF, which he just won against George Kambosos. Him, like his countryman, Usyk, always have strove to become undisputed. Even before people were becoming undisputed, left, right, and center, both Usyk and Lomachenko always talked about how that was their dream, that was their goal in professional boxing. And now with Lomachenko obviously failing against Devin Haney in that respect, even though he could have easily ended up getting that victory as well, but he unfortunately didn't. Things didn't fall into his lap like he would have liked, and sometimes that's just sports and sometimes that's boxing. But now, of course, he's come back. He was this close to retiring. When you listen to him post-fight, the only reason he really did come back was because of his father, who at 60 years old is not that old, and obviously, spent his whole career trying to develop his son into this incredible boxer, and would feel a little disappointed if his son left while he still had a lot to give in the sport, even after that disappointing loss to Devin Haney, which really almost sent him into retirement, which a lot of us felt was possible. He has fought 12 world champions in 21 pro fights. Now, you just think about that. 12 world champions in 21 fights. In his next fight, more than likely, he's going to be facing a world champion, whether that's Navarrete, Shakur, or Tank Davis, for his 13th world champion in 22 fights. That means only 10 fighters he's fought haven't been or weren't at some point in their careers world champions. This is not the norm, right? This is what only an elite group of fighters in boxing do. Fighters that people literally label as pound for pound greats, because they consistently are trying to challenge themselves by fighting other champions, other world champions. People wanted to dismiss them as just belt holders. But them being belt holders is still far more significant than 99% of the other fighters in the sport who have never and may never actually be at that level, right? When we think about guys like Floyd Mayweather, Pacquiao, Sugar Ray Robinson, and other great fighters from history, what people always talk about is all the world champions they fought, because that's significant. That tells you what kind of legacy you have when you consistently are fighting other guys that were able to reach that pinnacle of world title sort of status. And if you throw Sosa in there, who is a regular champion, it would be 13. But obviously, regular titles at this point, after the WBA sort of fucked things up by creating two belts, isn't as significant, obviously, as it once was. He has fought 17 world title fights in 21 pro fights. Obviously, in those 17 fights, he's currently 14-3, taking 3 losses, one to Salido, one to Lopez, and one to Devin Haney. But still, 17 world title fights in 21 pro fights. That means only 4 fights he's had in his whole career weren't world title fights. 4. His first fight, and then obviously Nakatani, Comey, and Vargas, right? Those are the only 4 fighters he's faced that weren't world title fights. And one of them, Comey, was actually an ex-world champion. Vargas could potentially go on to become a world champion. He's still young and looked good at 140 pounds. Nakatani, obviously not. And then Ramirez, who he fought in his professional debut. Yeah, at this point, obviously that's not going to happen. But once again, this is not the norm. The majority of fighters don't have an 80% world title sort of fight career where 80 something percent of their fights have been world title fights. The majority of people probably don't even have 50%. So this shows you really why people respect Lomachenko, because he's always tried to fight for world titles. He's always tried to fight the best. He's always tried to be in significant fights. Whether you liked it, whether you agreed with it, this is what he was chasing. This was what he was hungry for, right? Competition. Bud, on the other hand, has fought 11 champions in 40 fights. Inouye has 12 fight champions, obviously just beating Luis Neri last weekend in 27 fights. I'm not dismissing Bud. Obviously, his next fight against the Uzbekistani fighter is going to put him equal to Inouye and Lomachenko with 12 current world champions on their resume. These guys are the pinnacle. You have Canelo Alvarez and maybe somebody else that's in a similar situation, but there's not many fighters currently who have fought as many world champions as Bud, Lomachenko, and Inouye outside of Canelo Alvarez. Off the top of my head, I'm not even sure who fits that criteria. Let's just quickly go on BoxRec. I'm just curious off the top of my head if I can find somebody that's there. Inouye Crawford, Nakatani hasn't. Canelo, yes. Shakur, no. Ken Taraji, I don't think he's fought that many world champions. Probably 8. Better BF, no. Bam, no. Emmanuel Rodriguez, no. Matias, no. Ennis, fuck. Has he fought any? Takumi Inouye is now on BoxRec's top 12. Bivol, no. Oshaki Foster, he's faced 1 world champion, if I'm not mistaken. Ioka is probably similar. But Ioka obviously is a guy who's had 34 professional fights. And let's just see. I'm not sure exactly how many world champions he's faced. So let's just scroll through. Uh, Juan Hernandez, Navarrete, Yagashi, Felix Alvarado, Rumrong, Revco, McWilliams Arroyo, Donny Nietes, Aston Palitza, Kosi Tanaka, Francisco Rodriguez, Joshua Franco, and now he's going to be fighting Fernando Daniel Martinez. So he's fought 12 as well, 12 world champions as well, Ioka. It's not the norm, right? Obviously, the smaller weight fighters, a lot of them started their careers far earlier. So because of that, they fought more champions at earlier points of their career. This is the same for Lomachenko. Even though he didn't start fighting in the small weight divisions, he started fighting obviously at 126 pounds. Navarrete, he is going to be a 4-weight world champion going into this Lomachenko fight. 4-weight world champion is pretty historic. For Lomachenko to go in and beat him in his 4th weight division to unify titles is a significant fight. And obviously, something that's going to get a lot of attention. Obviously, the Mexican-American fans are going to be really intrigued and interested in this fight. It's probably not going to be pay-per-view. So it's definitely a fight that's going to be very interesting. It's definitely the fight that I hope happens next, especially if Navarrete beats Inui's countryman, who was part of the Olympic team that Vosdik, Usyk, and Lomachenko were a part of. Lomachenko won a gold medal at the smaller weight class, moved up a weight class to allow his countrymen to fight in the Olympics. And so if Navarrete beats him, especially if he does it in devastating fashion, it'd also build up a nice little sort of cross rivalry type of competition between those two fighters. Obviously, Lomachenko trying to redeem his countrymen, kind of like we just saw Inui versus Luis Neri in a similar situation. Loma versus Nava would be an exciting fight between two aggressive come-forward fighters. It'd be really an interesting fight, specifically because Navarrete would probably have a 6 to 8 inch reach advantage over Lomachenko. I'm not sure exactly. I thought his reach was close to 72, but maybe I'm just exaggerating. Let's see. Navarrete, 38, 1-1, 31 knockouts. An incredible fucking career. Only 1 loss and 1 draw at this point of his career. 29 years old, 5'7", with a 72-inch reach. 72-inch reach, man. Tank Davis, Shakur Stevenson don't have 72-inch reaches. He's going to be fighting Baranchek, obviously Dennis Baranchek, Lomachenko's countryman, currently 18-0 with 9 knockouts, 36 years old, just like Lomachenko, and him getting his first big opportunity, coming off of 3 very good fights recently. Anthony Igit, Vaughn Mendy, and Issei Chaniev, all really high-level competition. So it'll be interesting to see what he's able to do against this beast from down under. Lomachenko, on the other hand, 18-3, 12 knockouts, very solid knockout record for a guy who's not really a knockout puncher. His reach is 65.5 inches. 65.5 inches. It's going to be quite the fucking feat for Lomachenko to try to get inside and be effective against Navarrete. We've seen him against tall fighters. We saw him against Nakatani, who was also a very tall Japanese fighter who gave Teofimo Lopez quite some fits with his length, whereas Lomachenko was able to get inside his range where he was able to get his shots off very effectively. But Navarrete's a very different fighter. That uppercut that he throws from all kinds of angles, he does have a much better straight right hand right down the pipe. So it's definitely a very difficult and intriguing matchup, and one that I'd love to see. Tank Davis, on the other hand, currently a 2-weight world champion, pound for pound, one of the most exciting guys in boxing. Tank Davis, Lomachenko would be a great fight. The only problem I have with this fight would have happened 5 years ago, then it would have been a great fight, right? Now Tank Davis is almost 30 years old. Lomachenko is going to be 37, right? This fight could have happened when Lomachenko was 31, 32, and Tank Davis was like 25, 26. And at that point, it would have been a far more interesting fight. At this point, it just looks like somebody's trying to capitalize on fighting an older fighter to, claim that Manny Pacquiao-esque type of money and cap or clout by fighting a guy who's done a lot in the sport, but now you're trying to get him that he's sort of past his best. So I don't have a lot of respect for that, even though, yes, it's a great fight. Obviously, Lomachenko would probably get paid the most money in a pay-per-view fight against Tank Davis, but Lomachenko has never really been motivated by money in that sense, unlike many American fighters who really, it seems like their biggest interest is only financial. For Shakur Stevenson, currently a three-weight world champion, silver medal Olympian, and a pound-for-pound caliber fighter, as I mentioned, for him, it's kind of a similar situation. He's sort of like Bud Crawford chasing Pacquiao so that he can build up his name off of the accolades that Lomachenko has done and Pacquiao have done. You're fighting them now that you're 26 years old and they're 36. Literally, there's a 10-year gap in age between Lomachenko and Shakur Stevenson, right? And in truth, any real boxing fan out there would much rather prefer Tank Davis versus Shakur, right? One guy's 29, the other guy's 26. They've been going on back and forth with each other on social media like fucking crazy, like literally back and forth like crazy. But yet they're both chasing Lomachenko, who hasn't went at any of them on social media, just continues to do what he does in his career. Yet these guys are both trying to cap off of him. The question is, why are they ducking one another? And you know why? They're hoping to get an easy name win to build up their resume, build up their hype, so that they can use it then against the other fighter when they get into negotiations for the eventual unification fight between the two of them. And how long are we going to have to wait before a possible Shakur Stevenson Tank Davis fight? Right? Another 5 years when Tank Davis is 34 years old and Shakur is 29. At that time, it'll be a big enough pay-per-view fight that it'll be worth the risk, right? This is the problem, right? And some people are going to be okay with it. Some people are going to act like, this fight shouldn't be the next fight between them. Zepeda is another opponent that's right there as well. Zepeda obviously might be mandated by the IBF for Lomachenko. He's a nonstop punching machine who's been destroying everyone in front of him. I mean, literally, he's looked incredible. And the way he attacks nonstop, his body work, he's a problem for everybody. Like, a lot of people have been saying that it would have been great instead of Shakur Stevenson fighting some dude coming off of a loss that nobody's ever heard of, that German guy that fought Frank Martin, that he should be fighting Zepeda for his WBC title. That would be a real intriguing fight. Zepeda is the kind of guy who would make Shakur Stevenson fight at his best, because he would be nonstop fucking resilient in Shakur's face, forcing Shakur to be a superstar. And isn't that exactly what Shakur needs and what us as boxing fans would love to see, right? I think that would be a great matchup. Obviously, Zepeda against Lomachenko, great fight as well. It'd be really interesting to see how Lomachenko could deal with a guy like him. It's kind of similar to Canelo versus Jaime Munguia, right? You got the more experienced fighter, sharp fighter, against the guy who's younger with a great gas tank, who just is a non-stop punching machine. And it'd be interesting to see if Lomachenko, like Canelo Alvarez, would be able to deal with Zepeda in the same fashion that obviously Canelo was able to deal with Jaime Munguia. Great matchup, great fight. And then, of course, we have Raymond Muratalla, who obviously is a top-ranked stable fighter, currently unbeaten and a top 10 lightweight. Up until his last fight, which he did not look great against, he'd been looking fantastic. He destroyed a common opponent with Shakur Stevenson. And while Shakur struggled and did not look great against Nakatila, Muratalla fucking destroyed him. I think it was inside 2 rounds, maybe 3. Like, he really put a fucking beating on that guy, got him out of there like lickety fucking split. And at that point, it was just like, Jesus Christ, styles do make fights. Because we saw this guy with Shakur, and Shakur had tons of issues with him. Whereas Nakatila just walked over him, walked right through him. So stylistically, he's similar. Long fighter, pretty big lightweight, very aggressive, nonstop, not the best technical fighter or the best defensive fighter, but he definitely is going to be a very aggressive, come forward dude that's going to make you work. You're either going to be at your best or you're going to be outworked and beaten, right? And so that makes for good fights. Then, of course, we have Keyshawn Davis, the silver medal Olympian who is looking to finally become a world champion. Obviously, he's looked really good in his last few fights. Did have that marijuana issue, which somehow led to a no contest. I don't know how marijuana all of a sudden leads to that, considering marijuana is legal in America. But nonetheless, that was a little hurdle. Now, of course, he's sort of on the clean or straight and narrow, which I think if you're a professional athlete, you shouldn't be fucking around with booze or any kind of recreational drug, at least not at this point, because right now is the time you're going to get paid. Now is your time to shine. Now is your time to build your legacy, get paid millions of dollars so that later on you can kick back, enjoy, have drinks, smoke fat ones, and deal with the hose. But at this point, you got to stay fucking focused, man, on your career, on your goals. And so I'm happy to see Keyshawn is back on the straight and narrow. He's definitely one of the best young up and coming fighters. I don't know if he's going to potentially get a fight for a world title this year, but I would think probably by early 2025, he's going to have to be mandated to get a fight against one of those fucking dudes. Like, let's just take a quick peek at these current boxing rankings, just so I can see where exactly my man is. Because I know he's up there in sanctioning bodies, but I'm not sure exactly how high. So let's take a quick peek and check it out. So WBC top contenders, obviously you have Zepeda, Muratalla, Keyshawn Davis. So Zepeda, Muratalla, Keyshawn Davis. We know that Keyshawn Davis probably is not going to be fighting Shakur because they're homies. They're down. But maybe Andy Cruz, who's at number 7 versus Keyshawn Davis fight. But once again, that's a risky fight to put your young, upcoming, young superstar prospect in with, even though it's a good fight on the outside. Tank Davis has Cepeda, who is his number 1 mandatory, Martin, who he's fighting, Floyd Schofield, Santos, Cruz is number 9. Nicholas Walters is now number 14. I hope Nicholas Walters comes back, even though he took a long layoff. I can't believe it was that long. Keyshawn is not ranked by the WBA. That's not a surprise. WBA rankings are always suspect. IBF, you have Zepeda, number 1. Cambos is number 2. Lomachenko. Obviously, Lomachenko is now the champion. Keyshawn Davis is number 4. Muratalla is 5. I'd love to see a Davis-Muratalla fight. That'd be excellent. So he is obviously potentially right up there behind probably Zepeda for an IBF world title fight. For the WBO, you obviously have Baranchek, who's fighting Navarrete. Underneath of him, you have William Zepeda. So William Zepeda is right there, really on the cusp of being mandated by every single sanction body. Muratalla is number 4. Keyshawn Davis is number 5. So once again, Keyshawn is right there. And a fight with him, say, versus Muratalla, if he was to beat him, an in-house fight between 2 top-ranked fighters, then you would have to say that by 2025, he's going to be guaranteed a world title fight against one of these champions, one of them. But at this point, yes, it's probably too early to expect him to get a fight with Lomachenko. So who do you want to see Lomachenko fight next? That is the question that everybody wants to know. Um, Obviously, I think any of these fights are great, right? If he's fighting Navarrete, Shakur, Tank Davis, he's in a unification fight. What's the difference between one unification fight and another? They're all unification fights, right? You may try to push your narrative about who you prefer to get the opportunity, but the reality is these are all unification fights. They're big fights and significant. For guys like Muratala, Zepeda, right? And I forget who else was right there. I mean, Keyshawn, but as we say, he's probably a little bit further behind. Maybe he's got to beat a Murtala first. Zepeda is right there as everybody's mandatory. So somebody's going to have to step up and fight him. We know he is obviously a golden boy, DAZN fighter. So uh, a very likely scenario may be him actually fighting Tank Davis, because we know that Golden Boy has worked well with PBC in making fights. Maybe they'll give him a rehydration clause, and then Tank Davis will feel comfortable enough to take on William Zepeda. But let me know in the comment section below, who would you like to see Lomachenko fight next? Obviously, right now it's May. So I wouldn't think we're going to probably see Lomachenko back in the ring until probably the end of 2024, probably sometime around October or November, right? Because he's not going to be fighting 3 times a year, not at 36 years old, especially with hard training camps and everything else. So, obviously him and Navarrete are almost on the same schedule. Navarrete is going to be fighting this weekend. So, you can understand them being on a similar schedule, having a similar period of time off, the same opportunity to build back up for a big fight. So it does make a lot of sense. But Shakur also has a fight coming up soon as well. And so does Tank Davis. So all these guys' dates are pretty aligned. So in theory, he potentially could fight any of them. But let me know in the comment section below, who would you prefer? And I will see you next time. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. Enjoy.